I don't think there's any of us who are not touched by domestic violence. And what we're learning as we do our research about violence in our homes is that women are not the only victims of domestic violence. I mean, all across this nation, there is an increasing number of men who are being beaten by their wives or their girlfriends. And because of it, today you will find that there are even battered men's shelters cropping up where abused men can retreat for safety. As this country is just beginning to take the issue of battered men seriously, we think that is definitely something worth talking about as we talk about domestic violence right now on Rolonda. Show, we're always trying to save something in an hour. Save a family, save a relationship, maybe even save a life. We might save you. You could be a man listening today who might be a bit embarrassed to talk about this subject, but this might save your life. Today we're talking about victims of domestic violence, but not battered women. We're talking about battered men today. The University of Rhode Island's research program on domestic violence is reporting that every year some 100,000 men report that they have been beaten, battered, kicked, slapped, abused by their wives or their girlfriends. Roger filed one of those reports. He says that he was battered by his ex-wife Lisa, who we're going to talk to in just a minute via satellite from Kansas City, Missouri. Also later in this show, we're going to meet a man who claims he too was battered by his soon-to-be ex-wife. I think it takes an awful lot of courage, Roger, to come out and say, I'm a man that has been battered, and we all are touched by domestic violence. It must be a very lonely place that you are.
Yes, I suppose so. I didn't, I don't discuss it much with too many people.
Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to have the courage to come forth and talk to us today?
Well, I've only recently been educated that it is a growing problem, and I was convinced that it could help perhaps other people.
Mm-hmm. What exactly happened to you, and when did the abuse begin?
After our separation.
Mm-hmm.
There was a child involved, and I received custody of the child to the point she wasn't allowed to have overnight visitation with the child, and she was a heavy drinker. And every time not every time, but on occasion when she got drunk, she would take it out physically with me.
Mm-hmm. Doing things like what?
Oh, she's threatened to kill me. I've been bit. I had my home broke into at 2 in the morning, and quite a large amount of damage to my home. I've been attacked in public places by her, and some of my friends have also been attacked by her, physically.
Bitten by your ex-wife? I mean, enough to cause blood?
Yes. Chunks of flesh missing.
Mm-hmm. When you are attacked by a woman, who do you turn to, and how do they respond when you turn for help?
Well, initially I called the police, and it didn't take very long to realize they don't do too much about it. It's not the police officer's fault. As a matter of fact, when she broke into my home, the police officer recommended that I not complain along the lines of domestic violence, but instead complain about property damage. He said it will go a lot further, and it's
why
still
is
a pending
that?
case. So
why is that?
They just don't do much to women.
Is it because they don't believe your story?
I suspect.
Mm-hmm. Is it embarrassing?
Yes, it is.
I mean, do people call you wimp? Do they say you're a weak man? Do they say?
No, they've not said that to my face, but I can see the look in their eye.
Mm-hmm.
But it happens.
I must admit that when we were pulling this show together, I've talked to many battered women, and I can almost predict what that story is going to be. You can feel a certain feeling when you talk to women who've been battered, but I really didn't know what to expect when I was talking to a man. What is it that you think that we really need to understand as a nation about this form of domestic violence?
It's scary. When she first started threatening to kill me, for several months, I had to position myself at night. I couldn't sleep in my bedroom. I had to sleep between my daughter and the front door because of her. She would show up at my house anytime between 10, 11 o'clock at night to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm. And what has this done for your entire life?
Lost a lot of weight over it. It's been chaos. Hopefully it's on the downside now, but for the last 2.5 years, it's been quite a problem. I have 2 children at home that I have custody of, and I feel like we haven't had a life for 2.5 years. It's just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and we never know when.
Let's bring in your former wife now. Via satellite from Kansas City, Missouri, is Lisa, who is Roger's ex-wife. Lisa, thanks for joining the show today. We've heard some pretty disturbing things about your home life here. Are you a batterer?
No, I'm not.
So what would you call yourself?
I would call myself the abused one.
And why?
Because some of the things that Roger has said, I haven't been able to hear you guys that well, so I don't know exactly what he said.
Well, he says that you've bitten him enough to cause blood, that you have attacked him, that he's afraid. The past 2 years of his life have been a living hell out of fear of what you might do, busting in the house, busting up the property, scaring the children, scaring him. He's lost weight. We've heard a story that sets you up as a batterer in this home.
Well, yes, some of the things I have done. But there's always another side of the story.
Okay, then that's why we're having this show. What is a reason that a woman would beat her husband?
Roger, my ex-husband, is a very manipulating person, very controlling. And for the last 2.5 years, he has held my daughter over my head for absolutely anything and everything I do. He holds my daughter over my head, and yes, sometimes it does upset me.
Does it upset you enough to turn violent?
There has been times with his verbal abuse that it pushes me to a limit, and I will strike out.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever hit her back, Roger?
No.
Why not?
No, that's a lie. I have police reports of him. I've had cuts, scratches, black eyes, had to go to work with black eyes.
Roger?
Well, we went through quite an extensive divorce, and all this was presented, and I was awarded full custody of our daughter, and she was not allowed to have her daughter overnight to this very day.
And why? And on what grounds did she lose custody?
Her alcoholism and her violence.
Yes, Roger, but was I on trial for a child custody battle, or was I on trial for being an alcoholic, which I am not?
The judge made his decision.
By your lies in the courtroom, Roger.
What has this done to the lives of your children, Roger?
It's hard to say. I have a 12-year-old in the home, and then our daughter that's 2.5.
Is the 12-year-old a boy or a girl?
It's a boy.
How do you explain this to your son?
He's been through it. He was in the home when most of this happened.
And what does he say?
Well, frankly, he asked me why I put up with it, and I don't know how to answer him.
That's a lot to deal with.
It's affected him at school. The counselors at school, I've had worked close with them. It's affected his grades, but I think we're on the uphill, or on the downhill side of it now.
I'm interested to know how you talk to a young boy who's reaching puberty, who's discovering his manhood, who's watching his mother beat his father, dad having a difficult time with this, how he's going to learn about relationships. We'll continue on that thought. Also later in the show, we're going to meet a man who opened up the very first shelter for battered men in the United States. But when we return, we'll talk to a woman who openly admits that, yes, she's an abuser. She says she punches her live-in boyfriend whenever they're embroiled in a heated argument. We'll also meet another man who claims he, too, has been battered by his wife as we continue this discussion of a unique form, I think, of domestic violence. We were talking with you as a battered man, and you have a 12-year-old and a younger child, a little girl. The 12-year-old boy, how do you plan to, I mean, you have to change, I guess, how you're going to raise him now after he's seen his mother attack his father and dad now one of America's battered men. How do you explain that to a 12-year-old?
Well, the first thing that I want to make sure he understands, the same thing that my parents taught me, is just you shouldn't, as a matter of fact, my personal idea is violence is absolutely the last resort of the incompetent. And that's pretty much how I consider my ex-wife. She can't deal with a problem any other way except to get physical.
Then how do you explain all the police reports I have on you beating me?
You showed him in the divorce court to the judge, and like I say, he made his decision.
It must be really tough to have lost your children, lost custody of your children, for having, you know, in this kind of situation, a domestic violence situation. How do you deal with that as a mom?
It hurts every day, every single day I live it. And it's not only did I lose her through his manipulation and his lies, it's every
Lisa,
day.
you lost your daughter because you left and didn't come back for a week, and you came back with your boyfriend and thought you was going to take your daughter. And that didn't happen.
Roger?
Question.
My question is, Lisa, when Lisa asked Roger if he ever hit her back, I mean, that's not what I'm wondering. Do you defend yourself at least? Because she doesn't look like a kind of girl that can overpower you. I mean, fighting back isn't the answer, but you should be able to at least defend yourself. I mean, that's what it is with battered women. They're physically overpowered, but with battered men, you should be able to defend yourself.
Roger?
Well, like in one instance, she come to my home rather late, about 11 o'clock. As a matter of fact, it was on her birthday, and she was pretty well drunk. And she started a problem, and she started hitting on me, and I was defending myself, but she eventually took off her high-heel shoe, and she got through and hit me about a quarter-inch from my eye.
Roger,
Blacked both my eyes.
Roger, yes, it was my birthday, but prior to that, you were not letting me see my daughter.
Lisa,
and
you
finally,
live in a town 10 miles from where I live, and you and your boyfriend come all the way up to my house at 11 o'clock at night to have a
Roger,
fight.
it was my birthday, and you said that I could see her. I could come up and see her.
Not
but
at
when
11
I
o'clock
got
at
there,
night. She was in bed asleep, and she was only 4 months old at the time.
I was with my fiance, and
We were still married, if you'll recall.
Whoa, from the audience.
Lisa, can I ask you a question on TV? Can I ask you a question right now?
yes,
Were you still engaged with this other person while you still married this gentleman?
no.
Wait.
Hold on
question?
just a second.
What was that again?
Come on,
The guy
you got to
that
get
I-
right to the question, young man. My next guest, Rose, admits that she abuses her boyfriend, Robert, who says he's just simply embarrassed by this whole situation. Robert, I would think this would be an embarrassing situation to be labeled as a battered man. What does this do to a male, to his ego, to his life, when he has been beaten by his girlfriend?
Well, it does a whole lot of different things, you know, depending on how you look at it. Rose and I, we've been together for a short time, but we hit it off pretty well. She's a nice lady. She has a lot of good qualities, but boy, she has something inside her. I mean, she throws very accurately. Regardless of how fast I might be, she throws very accurately.
Too slow.
Maybe too slow. Not only objects, she throws words just as accurate.
That's abuse, too. I mean, I think we've all learned that sometimes words can sear like a mighty sword.
Yeah. I try to get an understanding from her as to why, you know, why.
So let us try to get an understanding. Rose, why are you abusing your boyfriend?
Aggravates me to death.
Like, for instance,
God.
what?
Any little bitty thing.
Give me an example.
He runs the water. When you try and you wash the dishes and you, instead of running a sink full of water and stopping it up, water runs for 15 minutes.
And that's a reason to hit
God,
somebody?
it drives me crazy.
And that's a reason to hit somebody?
Yeah. And he knows it aggravates me, though. You know, it aggravates me.
Robert, what is one of the times, are you afraid? I mean, are you afraid for your well-being, for your life or anything with Rose?
Not right away, but I mean, who knows what can happen.
Right.
One day she might throw the wrong thing and I may not get out of the way fast enough.
A frying pan could do some damage.
A whole lot.
Has it ever gotten to a point where you have thrown heavy objects, where you have been hurt, you got stitches, you got broken, or blood?
Not yet. Not yet. But
I just really don't understand. I mean, you look like a pretty healthy guy. What does it take to put her in place?
What the price of weed in China?
What do you mean put her in place?
What is she gonna? No, but what is she gonna do? Like run all over him? I mean, he has no self-respect, no self-dignity. What is that?
I figure they ought to they fall, hon.
You know, that is, I mean, a lot of people, and that's part of, y'all face it, that is society that is helping people get beat up and killed, okay?
Excuse me.
You're a man, you should take care of yourself.
Duh.
You go to jail, you're right.
I try to handle it in a more manly situation. It's easy for me to beat the hell out of this woman.
Yeah?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's easy, and it's much easier for me to be a bigger fool than she acts. But I was taught that women are not, I won't say the weaker sex, but they're the more feminine sex. I'm a man. I have sisters, I have nieces, and I have friends. I've seen men beat women. I've seen the outcome of it. This is not my, you know.
And I have a lot of respect for you for saying that, too.
Thank you.
But now, Rose, my sister, I have to deal with you on this. Okay. Now, you know violence is wrong. You know all the domestic violence that we have. What justification do you give for hitting somebody because he runs water too long?
I can do that.
Ask her why she don't wash the dishes then.
I do.
Or why you worry about the water running?
Come on, quick, get in there.
I'd like to say that abuse is abuse, no matter which gender inflicts it on the other one. And you have the right to defend yourself, no matter who does it, but I don't think you should hit the other person like you said.
I was just wondering, was Lisa or Rose ever abused when they were younger by their their parents or something like that?
Does abuse run in your family, Rose?
Well, not abuse. I was brought up, I'm the only girl and the baby, and my brothers taught me to fight and take care of myself. You know, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and I fought.
Okay. We're going to continue this because I think so many of us across the nation are concerned about domestic violence. Are there children in your home as well? No children.
Well, I have children. He does.
Okay, and especially what domestic violence does to children. When we return, we're going to meet a man who says that he's sick and tired of battered men being disrespected by our society. We're also going to meet a woman who runs a shelter for battered women, and she says that if a man is being battered, then he probably did something to deserve it. We'll be back in a minute.
Hey, Ro on the go here. Just wanted to drop in and say thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel and then go and enjoy all the other good stuff I'm doing in here. Some good stand-up comedy. There's some good advice from Auntie. There are podcasts. And, of course, some great Rolonda shows and wonderful moments behind the scenes of some of the many places I adventure. Like there's no telling where I'm going now. In the meantime, go back and enjoy the show. Let's get back to it and see what happens next.
We are continuing our discussion today about a form of domestic violence that I think is rather new, at least to a lot of people here in our audience, and maybe to you too. We're talking about battered men. The Family Violence Research Program at the University of Rhode Island reports that about 2 million women use some form of severe violence against their spouse. It's probably something very hard to talk about. Roger, I know that you were telling your story earlier. And how hard was it for you to pick up that phone and call the cops or to seek outside help?
Well, when it first happened, I didn't have any trouble picking up and dialing 911, but before the police got there, I had a lot to think about. I didn't, you know.
How many times have you abused the 911 system, Roger?
Every time that you've come over to my house and attacked me.
How many times have you sent the sheriff's department to my house on false occasions?
Never.
No. that is
Lisa
a
and
lie.
Roger, have you guys had abuse in your family before?
I haven't.
No. Lisa, what about you?
Only in the present.
Only in the
From
present.
Roger.
Well, joining us now is Mel Fight. He's a men's rights activist and the director of the National Center for Men. I'd also like you to meet Charlotte Watson, executive director of a battered women's shelter called My Sister's Place. And I'd like to welcome both of you to the show today. Charlotte, you take the position, and you might get a lot of heat for this, but you take the position that if a man is battered in a home, he probably did something to deserve it. Explain
Well, if we look at our statistics and if we look at our history and try to put domestic violence into a context, that's what we find. We find that about 75 to 90% of the cases of men who are being beaten or killed are cases where the woman is fighting back in self-defense. So certainly there are some men who are battered, but the statistics are very small. For every man who's battered, there are 30 or 40 women who are beaten. For every man who's legitimately battered, there are 30 or 40 women who are beaten. You know, our laws come from English common law, where we get the rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb said that a man couldn't beat his wife with a stick, could beat his wife with a stick as long as it wasn't any thicker than his thumb. Women were considered the properties of their husbands. Slaves were the properties of the men who owned them, and the women and the children were the property of the men who owned them also.
Okay, well, now we're not
to our husbands.
Well, these are interesting arguments. None of what she says is true. I mean, first of all, a 1994 report from the University of Manitoba listing all categories of violence from mild to very severe found that in all categories women initiate more violence than men. Look, I think...
But all of these reports,
do
Mel,
not
will
interrupt
tell
me,
you.
please. Don't interrupt me.
Well,
I
why don't you
think
tell the
that
whole
women,
story?
I think that women know how to be just as abusive as men. I don't think this is a unique problem, and I think that about half of the victims of domestic violence are men. I just want to tell you a story that makes the point about how I think abused men suffer in this country. A few years ago, a victim services agency near my home did a report on family violence, presumably to show how bad things were for women. Right? But the study showed instead that things were just as bad for men. The study concluded that 50%, one half of all the victims of domestic violence were men. All right? Now, I managed to get a copy of this study, and I had it on my desk when I called up the victim services agency. I thought maybe they would want to help men. Well, a woman answered the phone, and I said to her, I want to talk to you about your study. And she said to me, and I swear to you, she said, study? What study was that? And I had it on my desk, and I told her, but I have your study
right here. So why don't we know about that study? Aren't we concerned about domestic violence?
She didn't want to know about that study, and I want to tell you why. She didn't care about that study because she was a bigot. And I've learned a lot about bigotry, and I think in this country now we are rife with an anti-male bigotry. We are obsessed with the view that women are the innocent victims of mean and disgusting men.
Women are
that
not going to
obsession.
tolerate this. It's not bigotry. When we look at these studies,
why were you? She's not concerned about men who were victimized.
Mel, you're dominating. You want to be a
You're
dominant male?
trying to dominate me, and I'm not going to let you abuse me on this show.
From the audience.
Rolonda, I think this is symbolic of the mixed signals we're getting. I know as a teen growing up, if my mother ever disciplined me in public, I was embarrassed, mortified that someone would see my mother hitting me. But yet a section of male society that we know about enjoys being dominated by women, either physically or sexually. Where does the education begin?
We're not talking about that. We're talking about men who are legitimately bad. And the question came up about why can't he defend himself. Look, I want to tell you something. Even if a man is stronger than a woman, it won't stop a gun, a sharp object thrown across a room. If a woman hits a man while he's asleep, or if he's
that the major injuries are against women. Women are more likely to be seriously injured.
Okay, let me give you this. FBI statistic to back up your argument, Mel. FBI statistic, 80% of women who batter men use a weapon.
Yes, because they put distance between themselves to neutralize a physical advantage. And I want to tell you something else. If a woman calls 911 and says she was abused, even if she's lying, when the cops come, they're going to arrest him. And no man in this country is stronger than an entire police department. So, you know...
I got a couple of things to say. Number one, I got one decision in my favor after being scalded with boiling water with 1st and 2nd degree burns on my face. Right? I went into court. I got an order of protection. Right? Okay, decision was in my favor, right? And she could only return to the home to get her belongings. the victim services sent her and my child, right? They acted in concert with her to keep that child from me, violating my First Amendment rights of association, liberties of my children, then due process of the law by not allowing me to serve her with papers. My son was kept out of school. His education was neglected till I dropped that order. That's what victim services does to men. I had a gun stuck in my head in the church. I was hit over the head with a damn telephone. I should have killed her. I should have killed her, but I didn't. And you know why? Because my son wouldn't have had a father. That's why. I called 911. I got arrested. I called 911. I went down to the precinct. I went to the hospital. They arrested both of us.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
this. Don't tell me, I better stop it.
Yeah. When we return, we're also going to meet a man who has researched domestic violence and has some statistics about battered men that may shock you. You are not alone. We'll continue this conversation.
Rolonda, you know
Save it for me after the commercial, because what you're saying is important, and I don't want to miss it.
Well, how come
we'll be right
no
back.
woman has been executed?
Today about men who are abused by their wives or their girlfriends, and there's probably a lot more than you actually think exists. You had a question also.
Yes, personally, I feel I have a statement to make. It's just the chickens coming home to roost, because women have been battered for years, decades, and now all of a sudden it's a big issue about men being battered. But how many women have been murdered by their husbands? How many men have been murdered by their wives? I'm sure the statistics are not the same.
FBI, hold on a second. FBI statistics.
Killed by their husbands, as have killed their husbands.
Y'all have to
those women acted in self-defense, and the women who've been killed, according to the FBI, have been, according to the courts, have been killed in an act of offense.
How about we
40% of the spouses killed or husbands killed by their wives. This is fascinating. We're just trying to draw attention to a problem of men who are abused. Why is it that you need to even justify it in some way and bring up the problem of battered women?
Look, let's look at the facts here. Take a look at these. Number one, now these stats say men are assaulted by women at the same rate that women are assaulted by men, 1 every 18 seconds. Next fact, men are 50% as likely to be victims of domestic violence as women. Next fact, women do 50% of the hitting, shoving, and slapping in abusive homes. And that was from a national survey. All of these are from that national survey that our next guest conducted. I want you to meet Murray Strauss. He's a professor of sociology and co-director of the Family Research Laboratory at the University of New Hampshire. He has also authored many studies on battered men. And Murray, what was the #1 thing that really surprised you, that shocked you most in your studies?
Well, when we did our first national survey, this was back in 1975, I had no idea that this would be the case, but we found that women hit their husbands just as often, just as large a percent as men hitting their husbands. And this is half the people we interviewed were women themselves. You get the same story whether you interview women or men. That's now been repeated 3 times, 1975, 1985, 1992. And in every one of these surveys, women themselves talk about hitting their husbands, and the rates come out to be almost the same.
Why? Is it one of those patterns of abuse that we hear about so much in our violent homes across America? I mean, what were some of the reasons?
Most of the violence by both men and women is a coercive tactic. They want the other person to do or not do something, like turn the water off. You just heard it. Or stop running around with another man or another woman.
This isn't what Richard Gellis found in 1985, however. And what he said was that we have to look at the outcomes of the violence. That women are injured at a rate 7 times greater than men are, and killed at a rate at more than twice as much as women are.
Any human being who puts their hands up to another human being deserves whatever the heck they get. Nobody's got the right to batter anybody else, period. If you pick up your hands to somebody, you expect whatever it is you get.
And what Charlotte says just isn't true. But even if it were,
it is
even
true.
No, even if
it's true.
no, I think
you don't
that
want
I
it to
think
be true,
no,
Mel. You don't want it to.
You know what we're
Why
really
is it
debating
that?
here?
Let
We're
me
really
ask you
debating a
something, Mel.
philosophy of life that you have.
Whoa,
you have to stand up.
She didn't hit him. She just stood up.
Intimidating. Intimidation.
I think Charlotte just proved our point for us, didn't she?
From the audience, please.
Hi, I'd just like to say to the panel that we should not even begin to try to look at who's being battered more or less. I think it's equal in the fact that we need to acknowledge the fact that, yes, men are also being battered. Maybe not as long as the history of women. However, I work at an adolescent facility where I have a young boy who's suffering the degradation, the humiliation, and the same amount of shame from the abuse that he's receiving from his female counterpart as if it was in reverse.
And the reason we
so
have
the point being is that we need to address it as a society that has accepted surmountable amounts of violence and minimize the violence and address
and the
it
reason we have to talk about it is that for a man who's abused,
that's right.
For a man who's being battered, there are no toll-free hotlines, there are no shelters, there are no support services. So for a man who's being abused, it's actually even worse. Let me just make the point about why it is. Let me just make the point.
Mel, let me ask you. I tell you what. Let's take a break, and y'all learn. Mel and Charlotte, we're going to take a break while we learn how to speak one at a time. Okay? Now look, but we'll continue this. Men at one time, just like you said, though, Mel, had nowhere to turn for safety and help. No retreats. After being beaten by their wives or their girlfriends. So one man decided to do something about that, and he opened up the very first shelter in the United States for battered men. We're going to, yes, he can. We'll hear his stories right after this. Things I think when you talk about domestic violence. In 1993, there was an estimated 700 murders of by women who killed their husbands or partners. I think we've all heard of situations that have gotten so violent that things get right out of hand. That's from the Family Violence Research Program at the University of Rhode Island. Marie Strauss, as you co-authored a study of battered men, did you find anything about the escalation of violence, just how bad it gets? Does it lead to murder? Is that part of the concern behind your study?
Well, fortunately, it usually doesn't lead to murder, though it sometimes does. The problem is that we tend to respond to violence with violence. And what our studies have shown, one thing they've shown is that when women respond to violence by their husbands, by hitting back, that makes things worse. That's the worst thing in the world that they can do. So I think, but one of the things that I wanted to mention about violence by women is that it's dangerous for women. Let's just take that part of it, which is the kind of ritualistic slapping the cad for doing something outrageous. Well, the problem with that is that sooner or later she's going to be doing something outrageous as he sees it. And then she has helped to justify it. And so that gets that whole cycle in motion. The point is that people shouldn't be hit, regardless of whether they do something right or wrong.
That's right. From the audience.
I have a question for Roger. I was just wondering, what did you do to provoke your wife to hit you?
I was sitting at home in my living room, and she come to my house from another town 10 miles away. I don't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
But you could say the same thing about men you see who batter their wives. You could say, what did she do? Did she nag? Did she, provocation isn't an excuse. I think the reason that people have trouble understanding about battered men is the truth is men don't report. A man in my organization was in a fight with his wife. She threw a dish. It opened up a cut on his head. He was bleeding. The police came. They saw he's bleeding. She's not bleeding. They sized up the situation, and they arrested him.
But Mel, you know that violence against women is much greater than violence against men.
I think it's 50-50.
Are you afraid to walk down the street?
I think it's 50-50.
Let me just ask you a question. Are you afraid to walk down the street at night because you think that that women might jump out of the bushes and attack you?
2/3.
Are you scared? Are you scared of the women?
Can I answer her? I think, one of the things we've learned from feminists is that physical intimidation is violence. And I think I have to say that what Charlotte did in the last segment is violence, and you need to let her know that. That was violence.
From the audience.
You weren't listening to what she said. That's why she stood up. But I just wanted to know why you're wearing a skirt. I mean, are you trying to make a personal statement?
It's a silly question.
I'm just curious.
It's a silly question. I don't give a damn what you wear.
No, I just want.
Well, there are a lot of people in here who want to know, Mel.
Personal statement, or because it's comfortable, or you're
yes, and very soon men will be able to wear whatever they want. So get used to it.
You know what? But if you let, Mel has always said, because I asked him this question before one time too. He said, if you can wear pants, I can wear a skirt.
You know, but what Mel said is important about my behavior is that he says that that's violence. And that's what we find when we talk about men who are battered. There are some men who are battered. I've helped a man who was battered when there was no one else around who was trying to help him. 1 out of 19 years. But men who talk about being battered are talking about the same thing that he's talking about. They want to say that a punch is a punch, a slap is a slap, when that's not true. The outcomes are very different. What I did to him was not being violent. He wouldn't let me speak. I had to stand in front of him to be heard.
I think from the audience now.
Well, I have to say is this, nothing justifies violence in no shape, form, or fashion. And I was in a violent relationship for 11 years. But I got like Tina Turner, baby. I learned how to get out of there. Because I was one like this. If you hit me, I'm going to hit back. And when I hit hard, all 287 pounds. But the man upstairs brought me out, and I realized one thing. He wasn't for me, I wasn't for him. And I'm happy for whoever got it.
Get out of a violent situation.
And another thing,
that's right.
As far as for you, I have a son that's 12 months. And I pray that when he gets old enough that no one like you can tell him, because, hell, my son ain't gonna wear no dress. I'm sorry.
When we come back, we're going to introduce you to that man who founded the very first battered men's shelter in the United States. As Charlotte was saying, many men had to go to women's battered shelters, which is doubly difficult. When we come back, we'll show you the changing of times after this.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Rolonda, and I hope that you'll subscribe and follow so many of my other activities on my Rolonda channel, including some stand-up comedy, some podcasts, some great auntie advice, and loads of laughs and lots of fun. So subscribe and stay tuned. Now, let's get back to the show.
A tremendous rise of women's violence against men from 1985 to 1991, and we here at Rolonda are always concerned about violent family situations, and that's why we thought it was important to do this story. I like the points that we've been making. It doesn't matter who's violent. If your home is violent, then we've got help. There are currently fewer than 6 shelters for battered men in the United States. And we're about to introduce you to the man who helped found the very first one. Where are you, George? George Gilliland. He founded the very first one, the very first shelter for men in the United States. You're joining us live via satellite from St. Paul, Minnesota. Thanks for joining us, George.
Thank you for having me as a guest on the program.
George, tell me, if you could, what the situation was before you founded the shelter. If you were a man being battered by your wife or girlfriend, where could you go? What situation were you in?
Well, you could do the same as I and many other men have done. You can spend the days and nights in your car with very little money in your pocket, or you can humiliate yourself by turning to friends or relatives and begging for a place to stay and food in your stomach if you want to. Other than that, there's virtually no place to turn to.
George, what are the feelings and the dilemmas, the personal dilemmas that a man goes through when he's battered by his woman?
Well, some of those things that any male victim of domestic abuse feels, I'm sure, is being felt by hundreds of thousands of men that are watching this program, and I'm sure many of the men that are in your studio audience, when they've heard some of the comments and the laughter from your audience, when that man was talking about ducking objects and that she's getting more accurate with them, and he even made light of it a little bit, that instills a sense of real frustration and despair in me, because that is not funny. And fortunately, I've heard some comments from some ladies in your audience that have brought that to light, whose thinking is exactly the same as mine. I am not known as a men's rights activist by those that know me and know what we do. I'm known as a man that demands nothing more than equality and the same continuum of treatment for every victim of domestic abuse. I don't care if it's a man or a woman, or if they're black or white, lesbian or gay, Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist, or whatever they are. Every person that is a victim deserves the same type of treatment and compassion.
That's right.
And I think, too, that any act of abuse or assault ought to be treated equally. And as you've heard from some other people, this is not the case at all.
From the audience, George.
Just I have a statement. I'm not condoning this at all. But I have to be sympathetic to the women, because women have been battered for centuries, and also murdered.
Who gets battered?
Again, I'm not condoning it. I'm not. I'm really not. I'm just saying that me as a woman, I have to be a little bit more sympathetic to
What difference does it make who gets battered or slapped, whether it's a male or a female? It is a serious thing.
Then get out of the relationship.
Domestic violence is about power and control, George. You know this. You and I have talked before. In fact, I've talked with your son and your daughter.
Oh, yes. You're the one that likes to run on me the idea that the reason for all domestic violence is because man's desire to control.
One at a time, please. Protection against you. So I think it's important to put things into some kind of perspective. Domestic violence is about power and control. It's about a relationship where there's a whole pattern about trying to maintain power and control, very much like racism in our country. You know, those of us who are white are born into a kind of privilege just by the color of our skin, and we think that gives us a right to power. And men who batter women are born into this country thinking because they're born male, they have a right to have power over, to be the king of the castle.
I think I asked you
and we're
about
talking
3
about,
years
we're talking
ago.
about,
from the audience, please.
about power and control.
I just think it's terrible.
Charlotte, I believe I asked you about 3 years ago, where do you come off by saying that domestic violence is man's desire to control a woman, and yet 3 years ago I asked you, how do you account for domestic violence then in gay and lesbian relationships, and you dodged that question, and every other advocate has been dodging it ever since. So it doesn't hold any water, Charlotte.
I agree with her that it is about power and control, but women hit to exercise power and control and to coerce also.
And I have to say also, I think that Charlotte's approach is dangerous.
Excuse me,
I really do.
Rolonda.
Because by scapegoating men, you get men angry, so you get more male violence. And by implicitly condoning female, no, please, I let you finish. By implicitly condoning female violence, you get more of that. So all around, you get more violence, more victims. But you see, that's good for Charlotte because that's more money for her.
And from the audience. From the audience, please.
I just think it's terrible how the women are so insensitive to men's pain. I know men who are abused, and it's a terrible thing. And I think Mel's skirt looks great.
I just want to comment on
It's been a while
something
since
that
I've seen you, and I'd like to say hi. We need to get together soon.
Hello,
it's good to
George.
hear your voice again.
Male bonding. Hold on just one second.
You can make fun of whatever you want. Mel is a good man, and he's intelligent, and he knows what he's dealing with.
Okay, George, we've got some audience members who want to get involved.
I want to comment on a comment that Big Shirley made in the last segment. And she mentioned the gentleman having a skirt on and saying that she wouldn't let her son wear a skirt. And I think she conveyed a message there of the socialization that we have with men being feminine. Like, if you wear a skirt, you have to be feminine. So I think that, like in this relationship going on over here, I think that because your husband doesn't fight back, and we're taught as men to be macho and fight back, that because he's not fighting back, you see him as less than a man and feminine. So therefore, you choose...
Trust me,
She's probably the type that if she sees a
We'll be right back and continue this situation, this conversation. I tell you, thank you. I want to know about the laws. How do the laws pertain to this? I want to talk to you about how the laws pertain to battered men when we come back. We'll be right back. Cropping up across the nation. If you are a man at home watching who happens to be battered, there are places out there to help you. We'll be listing some numbers that you can call for help throughout the show. You had a question?
It seems like there have been a lot of facts and statistics stated here, but it's also a fact that men are stronger than women, so it should be easier for them to get out of a relationship. You shouldn't feel as though you have to stay in a battered relationship like the couple that was on earlier.
No, men stay in relationships for the same reason women do, and usually for the sake of the children.
Roger, did you stay in the relationship longer for any reason?
No, the abuse didn't start till we separated.
Lisa?
I had the baby.
So you took
Lisa?
Yes.
Lisa, be a satellite there, Roger's ex-wife. Can you give me an example or take me back to one time when you lost it and just attacked Roger? I mean, give me a scenario of what drives a woman to beat her man.
Well, I got a good example. On November 3rd of 1991, I was 5 months pregnant with my daughter, and my husband at that time decided not to come home. Well, around midnight that night, I went looking for him, and I found him hiding out at a bar, and he'd been out with a woman all night. And we'd only been married 2 months.
Now, what are y'all uh-huhing about? That's still, I mean, is that reason to go and beat somebody? So shame on y'all for saying that.
It most certainly
No, what
is.
I'm trying to say
Wait a minute, hold on. There's one of the girls. Wait a minute.
I wouldn't say it's a reason for her to batter him, but at the same time, he was emotionally and mentally battering her by doing what he did.
Then let her get out of the relationship and put an end to it.
5 months pregnant, another woman.
Does not have
I
to
don't
get
have a
violent.
clue what she's talking
No,
about.
but you see, but I think women do that to men too. I mean, you could say
Roger,
women
you got
nag
your
all the time. That's
BWI
not an
that
excuse
night.
for a man to hit a woman, is it? Is it? You know, I just want to say one thing. I think that George's shelter is so important. And the reason is that if a man is battered and he goes to the police, you know, they're likely to arrest him. At best, they're going to laugh at him, and we know that, so we don't report. You know, women say that men don't get it. We get it.
George?
We know that in almost every confrontation between a man and a woman, law enforcement is going to be on the side of the woman no matter what.
George, talk about the law as it pertains to battered men. How much protection from the law could you get?
Virtually none, at least here in Minnesota, and from the reports that I get from across the nation, it's the same way everywhere. Now, the other thing that I want to say is, as an example, they talk about these FBI statistics. We have a state law here in Minnesota that absolutely forbids law enforcement officers from collecting data on male victims of domestic abuse. I am going to be hitting the state of Minnesota with a lawsuit in this regard very soon. But when a man, as an example, is killed in Minnesota by a violent woman, then that goes down as a criminal statistic. It does not go down as any kind of a domestic. I have had instances where police officers or deputies have turned in reports on battered men that have been killed and injured, and they have been called, those forms have been sent back to the chief of police or a sheriff, and a man has been called in to the office and been chewed out and disciplined, saying, "Don't ever do this again."
George, were you a battered man? Were you a battered man? Were you the victim of battery?
Yes, I was.
What's your story? How did that start, and what did your, I would take it, ex-wife do to you?
My wife at that time, from a very short marriage, was all of about 5 foot tall and 95 pounds, and if I'd wanted to, I could have broke her in half like a pretzel. She had me backed up against a wall with her finger in my nose, saying, "Go ahead and beat me, you no good SOB. Go ahead and hit me. I've had other bones broken before. Go ahead." And I tried to move away from that woman and get out of the house, and she blocked the doorway, as is frequently common. She would tell me, "Hey, you know, cops don't arrest women," and she was right.
Well, what did she do to you?
She, at one point, picked up a board that had a small nail in it and swung at me with it and hit me just above my right eyebrow, where I've still got the scar today. And if she had hit me a half-inch lower, she'd have taken my eyeball out.
From the audience.
Okay, I agree that there are some, you know, situations where a man is just overwhelmed by the woman and just can't protect themselves. Now, if it's someone that's physically handicapped or someone who, you know, can't protect themselves, I would really empathize more with that person than someone who's physically fit. I mean, a woman 5'3", you know, 85, 90 pounds, what can you really do?
But men are brought up, by and large, that you don't hit a woman under any circumstances. That is a coward's way of doing things.
That's true. From the audience.
And many men don't do it.
Mel, I believe that a lot counts on how you represent yourself.
And I mean, how do you expect to get your point across to the male audience out there if you're wearing a dress?
No, I'm not even going to dignify it. I'm not even going to dignify it. Sit down. No, just to set the record complete, the study I referred to earlier, the New York State Suffolk County Victims Information Bureau, 50% of the victims are men, 50% are women. This information is out there. There are dozens of studies that are out there. If you care about the truth, it's there. If you're an anti-male bigot, you can indulge your bigotry by simply ignoring the truth.
Quick question.
Man who hates women.
Well, I just have a comment. I don't think, I mean, I think that maybe in some cases it may be, you know, males do get abused, but it's not right for you to sit up there and to deny the fact that women mostly are getting abused a lot more.
But I cited a study that you just chose to ignore.
I mean,
you're one of the bigots that I
women
referred to.
are a lot
It says here,
smaller, and I don't think that they can defend themselves as much as the
problem
male
with this
can.
woman
Now,
is like
if
many
you,
people in
there are
society,
many
we are
men
not
who may be watching.
responsible for her
There
ignorance.
are.
However, we are
All right.
responsible to do our part in bringing this issue to the public. And fortunately, there are shows like Rolonda that's willing to do this.
Well, everybody talk. Everybody talk. There are many, y'all quiet down. Hold on, because this is some important information. There are many men out there who are too embarrassed. I'm trying to help your abused brother, sir. There are many men out there who are concerned about being abused, too embarrassed to turn for help. If you are a man who's being battered by your wife or your girlfriend and you need help, you can call the National Congress for Men and Children. That number is 1-800-733-DADS. And don't go away. We'll be right back with more information.
I definitely feel bad for these men who've come forward with their stories, but I think that these two people right here in the middle should change clothes, change hairstyles, and take a shower.
Let me ask, Lisa, somebody asked in the audience during the break how you felt about yourself and as a person after the abuse was done.
Well, the so-called abuse that he says I did, I'm not admitting to anything.
Lisa, did you break into my home or not?
No, I did not. Rolonda, I would also
I have
like to say...
eyewitnesses like the next door neighbors, you know.
Rolonda?
Yeah? Rolonda, I would like to say
Could I
that...
speak about the shelter that we have here in St. Paul for just a minute or two?
Okay, just let Lisa make her point, please. Lisa?
Rolonda, I would like to say that if Roger Pearson is a so-called battered husband or person, he is absolutely wrong. The only thing that is battered with Roger Pearson is his ego, because I am his fourth ex-wife, and he has done this to all the other ex-wives. Not only physically abused, emotionally abused, but legally abused all of us. And I'm the only one that fights back.
George, tell us about the shelter. What does the shelter provide? What can men expect in a dire situation to get from your shelter?
I don't know that they expect anything when they come here except an ear of somebody to talk to and maybe have some understanding of what they're going through and what they're experiencing and how they're feeling. Here at the shelter, we have a number of beds, and this whole shelter is clean and comfortable. It's very private. The guys that come here with their children, and as an example, last week we had a man with 4 children here. They find it very surprising that it is as clean and comfortable and as home-like as it is. We have had various businesses that have donated all the carpeting that's brand new. All the furniture is brand new. The beds are clean and comfortable. We furnish them with shaving cream, razors, toothbrush, toothpaste, combs, those kind of things when they get here to every man that comes in.
George, perhaps as important as all of those other things, just like you said, a listening ear. We have all learned that through battered women's shelters, that those women leave their homes fleeing danger with the clothes on their back and still have to work to put the food on the table for their children, and I would assume it's the same for a parent who happens to be male. We'll return.
Very much so. And
we'll be right back, George. Let's take a break. Joining us today. Roger, it took a tremendous amount of courage to do what you did, and I appreciate that because hopefully you saved another life or helped another life be better. I'd like to thank Lisa and thank George for joining us via satellite and joining this conversation. I think we learned a lot
Rolonda?
about a topic that we have not heard an awful lot about. And for those of you out there who are in a violent situation, try to get out of it and know that there
Rolonda?
is help available. George is waiting there for you, and plenty of other people. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on Rolonda.